Hi all, Adi here from Hampshire and Jaunts. As always, thank you so much for clicking on the video. I'm in deepest, darkest Hampshire and I'm at St Nicholas Church in Chawton, and this was Jane Austen's local church and where she worshipped. I'm really short of time, I think it closes in about 10 minutes, so let's get in there really quickly and I'll film as much as I can. St Nicholas Church here in Chawton in Hampshire is a particularly special place for anyone that's interested in Jane Austen, because this wasn't simply a church somewhere in the village associated with Jane Austen, it was actually her parish church. Now Jane lived here in Chawton from 1809 until 1817, along with her mother Cassandra and her sister, who interestingly enough was also called Cassandra, and this was the church where they would have attended. Now after I visit the church, I will go round to her mother and her sister's headstones and pay my respect. Now the church here is just a short walk from the house where Jane lived and where she did so much of her writing. Unfortunately, it is actually closed during my visit, but we will pop through the village after this and I will show you the outside of the house and a little bit of the village where she lived. It's easy to imagine Jane and her family walking along this path into the church, and the Austens family home is just a couple of minutes down the road, and they were very much part of this same small community. But there's something slightly unusual about this church, because although Jane Austen definitely worshipped here, the building we're standing in today isn't quite the church that she would have known. And I did love that there was an extensive map of the graveyard and the graves, and someone's put an awful lot of work into that, and that's a fantastic resource for anybody trying to locate some of their ancestors. So well done whoever did all that work. 1602 to 2022, that's quite an extensive memorial book, isn't it? Anyway, back to the church. So there has been a church on this site since at least the 13th century, and records indicate that there was a rector here in 1289. So it has been a place of Christian worship for hundreds of years. But sadly, 50 years after Jane's death in 1871, disaster struck as a fire destroyed most of the old church. So what we're seeing and walking through today is actually a Victorian rebuild of the much older church. Now the rebuilding took place in the early 1870s, with the new church designed by the architect Sir Arthur Bloomfield. It's mainly built from flint, which is very typical of Hampshire churches, with Bath stone used for some of the architectural details. And the style is essentially early English Gothic, with the nave, the tower and much of the rest of the building belonging to that Victorian reconstruction. But as you can see, there's still loads of parts of the old church here, and this is where it gets particularly interesting, because this part of the church, the chancel, survived the fire, and at the eastern end here has been redecorated since Jane's time, but this is the part of the medieval building that actually survived the destruction of the fire. So when you look towards the front of the church here, we're looking at an area that has a genuine connection with the much older building, and Jane would have known this part of the church. And there are also memorials which survived the church, and this includes some of the impressive memorials connected with the Knight family. And the Knights were very important when it comes to understanding why Jane and her family were living here in Chawton in the first place. Jane's brother Edward had been adopted by Thomas and Catherine Knight, and the family owned Chawton House, which is nearby, and eventually Edward inherited the estate and he took the surname Knight. And in 1809, Edward was able to provide a home at Chawton for his mother and sisters. So that's what brought Jane and her mother and Cassandra, her sister, here. So it was during those Chawton years that Jane's writing really flourished. She revised and prepared several of the novels that would eventually make her one of the most famous writers in the English language. Sense and Sensibility was published in 1811, Pride and Prejudice followed in 1813, Mansfield Park was 1814, and Emma in 1815. Now I just want to mention this amazing memorial book that I found on the side, where I love this because it's got all the Commonwealth war graves in it, and it has the history of the people that are buried here, and I just wish I'd had more time. I'd love to be able to have this book and walk around the graveyard and give you a little bit more history, but unfortunately, as I said, the church was closing, so I didn't have enough time. But well done to whoever put the work into producing this fine piece of history. One of the things I find fascinating about these old churches is that sometimes we can find little physical connections with the people who lived and worshipped here centuries ago. And there's one particular good example of that inside the church. There's a pew dating from 1733 which survived the fire, and it's right back against the wall, and it's the only original pew that survived that devastating 1871 fire. So while much of the seating we see around us today is much later, that particular piece of furniture goes back to the 18th century. So Jane Austen was actually born in 1775, so this pew was already more than 40 years old when Jane came to live in Chawton. Now, although we can't say that Jane actually sat on this particular pew, it does give you a very tangible connection with the church as it existed during her lifetime. Now, the church itself was also closely connected to the Knight family, and because they held the right to appoint the rector here for several centuries, because that's how it used to work. And during Jane's time, the rector was the Reverend John Papillon, and he's actually mentioned in Jane Austen's letters, and there's a rather amusing family story connected with him. So apparently there was a running joke that Jane was supposed to marry Mr. Papillon. So whether Jane herself was particularly impressed by that idea is another matter entirely. Now, she never did marry him, of course, and in 1817, just before Jane's death, her brother Henry Austen became a curate here for a short time. So this isn't simply a church that Jane happened to attend occasionally. There are several members of her family very closely connected with the parish, and that family connection continues after Jane's death. I found another connection to another female author in the church, and her name was Caroline Glyn, and she was a novelist who lived and wrote here in Chawton. And what's really remarkable about Caroline is just how young she was when she began publishing her work. So her first novel, Don't Knock the Corners Off, was published in 1963, and Caroline was just 15 years old. Now, she went on to write several more novels, including The Unicorn Girl, Heights and Depths, and The Tower and the Rising Tide. But Caroline's life eventually took a very different direction, because she became increasingly drawn towards religious life, and she joined the Poor Clares order. She eventually became a member of the community at the convent of St Mary at Stroud in New South Wales, Australia, and that was actually mentioned on the plaque here in the church. And despite leaving the world of writing behind in many ways, she continued to write. Caroline died in 1981, and she was aged just 33. And I think it's really remarkable that here in Chawton, such a small village, so strongly associated with Jane Austen, there's this reminder of another woman who lived here and became a published novelist in her own right. So they were both very different, their lives were very different, but both of these women wrote novels here in Chawton, and it certainly wasn't something I was expecting to discover here in the church today. I'm going to head outside into the churchyard now, and I'm going to find the graves of two very important members of Jane Austen's family, and that is her mother Cassandra Austen, and she died in 1827, and Jane's sister Cassandra, who died in 1845. Now they are buried together here in the churchyard, and the graves are actually listed as Grade 2 historic monuments. So although Jane herself isn't buried here, members of her immediate family are. Jane died in Winchester on the 18th of July 1817, aged just 41, and she was buried in Winchester Cathedral. Now her original cathedral memorial doesn't actually mention her achievements as a novelist, and it wasn't until later on that a brass tablet was added recognising her literary reputation and the fact that she was known to many through her writings. It's such a shame the original church burnt down, isn't it? But nevertheless, it was a nice quick little visit, and nice to find her sister and her mum's graves. And then over here I've just spotted these like lines of crosses. They're like perfectly symmetrical, and I believe there's something to do with the Knight family. Don't know if somebody's doing some tree work there. Something was going to fall on my head. Hold on. Jane Austen's house that's down in the village is actually closed. You can't film in there anyway, so I probably wouldn't have bothered going in anyway. But it's a nice village, so I'm going to show you some of the houses. We'll have a look around the village, and I'll film the outside of our house as well. It's a nice wall actually all around this churchyard. Quite interesting. I just want to take a moment here to thank each and every one of the Hunts and Jaunts Society members, because their support really does help with my petrol and travel costs. So that means I can travel to more places and travel a bit more further afield to bring you more videos. And if you would like to become a member of the channel, then you'll find the link in the description below. So thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. Your support is so appreciated. So that's Frodo Baggins. I think it must be some sort of a like scarecrow competition. Some villagers do that, and I've seen it in Sussex before, and there's quite a few of them. I like Frodo. I'll record any other ones I see as we walk back down into the village. Beautiful day. You can see the fields in the park here behind me, all brown and dry, and that's because we're in the middle of a drought here in the UK. I know most people, if you don't live here, think that it rains all the time. Whilst we do get a lot of rain, it doesn't rain all the time. Oh look, all the blackberries starting to come out. Oh, I'll be picking some of them soon. Put them in a pie, blackberry and apple pie, or blackberry and apple crumble. Which one's your favourite? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, the rain, we haven't had any. So it's really dry and everything's gone brown. And there's also a thick layer of dust now on everything. Yeah, interesting how it's going to affect us going forward. If it does, this always happens, doesn't it? We had one of the wettest winters and now we've got one of the driest summers. So it always balances itself out. So, oh, look at this one. It's supposed to be Marilyn Monroe. Oh, look. Hollywood. So that's Jane Austen's house there behind me, and I thought I'd stop and have a drink because it is so hot today. So I've got elderflower lemonade. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, very nice. And we'll walk over there, finish this, and then we'll walk over there and have a look. This is the cottage where Jane lived with her mother, her sister Cassandra, and their close friend Martha Lloyd from 1809 until shortly before Jane's death in 1817. And although it looks quite modest from the outside, this little house is incredibly important because Jane spent the last 8 years of her life here, and these were some of her most productive years as a writer. Because while she was living here, she revised and published Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park and Emma, and she also would have worked on Persuasion and Northanger Abbey. So when we stand outside this rather ordinary looking Hampshire cottage, we're actually standing outside the place where some of the most famous novels in the English language were written and developed. Now, this house is now a museum dedicated to Jane and her life here in Chawton. Sadly, I'm not going inside today because it's closed, because I didn't get here until the early evening. But even though we're not going inside, the outside gives us an idea of just how small and relatively simple Jane's world would have been. And it's only a few minutes walk from the church where we've just visited, bringing together two very important parts of Jane Austen's everyday life here in Chawton. Well, I'm going to wrap the video up here. That was a great little visit to Chawton, down here in deepest, darkest Hampshire, looking around Jane Austen's church and the outside of our house anyway. If you did enjoy today's video, if you could please like, subscribe, hit the hype button, do all those sorts of things. I really would appreciate it. It doesn't cost you anything, but it really helps the channel out. And if you'd like to support the channel a little bit more, say I always make donations, help with petrol, etc., then there's the Buy Me a Coffee link there on the screen. And thanks again, it really means the world to me that you've watched it, and I shall see you for the next one. Bye for now.